I think I hit the magic button there. Give me one sec. Okay, yeah, I think we're good. All right, we'll get started anyway. Hopefully we don't miss the whole lot, but anyway. All right, let's go. So welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is We Love Craft Beer or Beer-ification, and today we're going to take a dive into the style 11C, which is special bitter and commonly referred to, best bitter, correct? Best bitter, but commonly referred to as an ESB, extra special bitter. But that is an appellation of one particular style of beer in England called Fuller's. But anyway, that's the short intro. I'm going to hand over to Simon and welcome Adrian, and we're just going to start having a talk about this style. So you've done the background on this one, Simon. I'll hand over to you, and you can start telling us about the style.
Sure. Yes, Nigel mentioned ESB is not a style in and of itself, but it comes from Fuller's ESB, which is one of these bitter styles. The idea is it's an average strength to moderately strong British beer ale. So there's three types of British beers in the BJC pipe guidelines. There's an ordinary bitter, which you don't often find on a shelf. It's not often packaged. It's the sort of thing you find on a cask at a pub. And it's probably dying off as it is. Then you have the best bitter, which is a little bit higher in alcohol. But again, similar properties all these three beers share, but they're just higher in alcohol. And then we get to the special bitter, the third one, which is 11C. So average strength, moderately strong British bitter ale. The balance may vary between the malt and the hops to somewhat bitter. So there's a little bit of balance there and a little bit of wiggle room. Drinkability is a component of the style. In other words, people should be able to sit and drink 4 or 5 of these quite comfortably. A rather broad style that allows for considerate interpretation by the viewer. In England today, ESB is it's Fuller's trademark. And no one thinks of it as a generic class of beer. It is unique but well-known beer that has a very strong, complex malt profile not found in other examples. Often judges tend to overly penalise English strong bitters because they expect them to be as complex and malty as a Fuller's ESB, which is quite unique, but nevertheless part of the style. In America, ESBs mainly means multi-bitter, reddish standard strength, British type beer, and is popular craft beer style. This may cause some judges to think of the US brewpub ESBs as representative of this style.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, strong bitters are really a higher gravity version of best bitters, which is 11B, although not necessarily more premium, since best bitters are traditionally the brewer's finest product. British pale ales are generally considered premium export strength bitter beer that roughly approximates a strong bitter, although reformulated for bottling, including increasing carbonation levels. As I mentioned earlier, if these things are running off a cask in a pub, they don't have much carbonation, little to none, almost still. But when they put them in cans for us, they usually put that carbonation level up. While modern British pale ale is considered a bottled bitter, historically the styles were different. Okay, so shall we have a look at our beers?
For sure.
And run through a tasting.
Yep, and while we're doing that, just a couple of things about glassware and also temperature is that classic glassware is what they recommend, like so pint glass, shaker glass, Willieback, anything that's sort of wide and narrow. This one, obviously, because it would be a little bit more normally, we were only using like a 375 can, but you normally get that as a pint. And also, interestingly, when I had a look at serving temperature, even though the ABV on these are only at about, the range is from 4.6 to 6.2. The actual serving temperature is up to 10 degrees, which is pretty warm for a low alcohol beer. So that's why they're always going on about Poms drink their beer warm and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's interesting that it's actually it's recommended to be served quite warm compared to other beers at that sort of temperature.
Yeah. They are a very malt-driven beer. So, and you always find, like many of us notice, when you drink a beer, often it tastes very different at the start to what it does at the end. And these malt sort of properties tend to come out as the beer warms up. So, yeah, you get a lot more of that malt character when it is drunk, a bit warmer. All right, let's have a look. What does it look like? Mine's, see there, it's kind of like a copper colour, which fits within the guidelines, light amber to copper in colour. I did have white head on top, but it faded fairly quickly, and that's okay for the style too. You're allowed to have low carbonation and the head that fades fairly quickly, so that's pretty well to style, so that's okay. That's not a big drama. How's yours, Adrian?
Yeah, I'm getting about the same, I think.
Yeah.
Certainly that my white in there. Certainly that copper is there. Again, the head retention, it dropped away fairly quickly. Carbonation is low. The malts are there, nice and full, good mouthfeel. Nice body, I think, as well. And like you were saying before about temperature, I think as it warming up a little bit, that malt profile is coming to the fore.
Yeah. And yours looks something similar, a similar sort of colour. Have you got the same beer as me, Nigel?
Yeah. We got the Geezer Pleaser. And interesting.
It's going to be pretty similar then.
Yeah. Interestingly, with the ABV range, I noted with these too. So again, with this particular style, it's 4.6 to 6.2, which is what they call their strong bitter. The best bitter comes in at 3.8 to 4.6. So like that's nearly what we'd call mid-strength, just a bit over. And the ordinary bitter...
Yeah, it's a special beer, yeah.
And the ordinary bitter is 3.2 to 3.8. So they're like, the talk, you always think about, it's the strong bitter. And it's like, well, yeah, it is, but it's only, the range is only 4.6 to 6.2. And this one comes in at 4.8. So it's sort of, you got in your head that it's a strong beer and it's really not.
Yeah.
I wonder where that comes from in the UK. Is that because I've never really thought of the UK or English beer styles as being low alcohol content, but these ones obviously all pretty low.
And it fits that sort of culture, that British pub drinking culture. Like you're not going to go to the pub and have 10% IPA. You want to hang out. It's a social event. You want to hang out with your friends. So these session beers kind of lend themselves to that sort of environment. It's what people want.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of fits the situation, the culture, the way beers are drunk. Aroma. Should we talk about aroma? Can anyone smell anything? I don't know if my aroma is going to let me smell anything. What do you smell, Adrian? What do you got there?
A bit of caramel toffee.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of sweetness.
Yep. Caramel sweetness.
Yeah. Caramel sweetness, toffee.
Yeah, that's exactly what I get too.
Yeah, maybe a bit of dried fruit.
Dried fruit, yeah.
Raisiny stuff, yeah.
Yeah. Any hop character, any earthy floral character or estery sort of fruity smells in there too?
No, I don't get I don't get esters.
Not really, no.
I just get sort of a
I'm not getting
caramel
much.
like that. You know, the little toffees that they sell at the Fate, where it's basically
Yeah.
they just put it in a little those little paper
In the
things, and
paper
it's just
can,
basically
yeah,
toffee to suck on.
sort of.
Yeah.
That's all I
Any
get.
biscuit? Do you get any biscuit in there in the aroma?
No.
No. All right. Well, let me read out aroma. What we sometimes find in these styles. You don't always find everything, but these are the parameters that you might expect to find. So hop aroma, moderately high to moderately low. I think we're seeing fairly low in ours. Typically floral, earthy, resiny, or fruity character. Medium to medium high malt aroma, optionally with a low to moderate caramel component. Medium low to medium high fruity esters. English beers often do have fruity esters. That's just a component of those English ales. Generally no diacetyl, although very low levels are allowed. There could be diacetyl in here. I wouldn't have a clue.
I would. I'd pick it up
I don't
straight.
really know.
I'd pick it up straight away. I'm really sensitive to it, and I'm not getting it.
Oh, okay.
So.
Nothing there. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Please,
We're ready to move on to flavour.
So, yeah, please explain diacetyl. I don't quite get that one.
You explain you explain the technical reason. I'll explain the flavour.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So diacetyl is a byproduct of fermentation. So I'm not all that clued up, but there's all these chemical pathways as the yeast turns sugar into alcohol. And diacetyl is one of these intermediaries in the pathway. And so all yeast produce diacetyl, but then before they finish fermentation, once they start running out of sugars, they start eating that diacetyl up. And so brewers, when they make a beer, sometimes, especially lager brewers, they're brewing at really low temperatures. They will raise the temperature towards the end of fermentation, called a diacetyl rest. And the idea is they're trying to keep the yeast going. They don't want the yeast to fall asleep too early before they clean up that diacetyl. And if the yeast does fall asleep too early, you end up with diacetyl. Sometimes you get them in poorly made IPAs because the enzyme in the hops actually can end up releasing sugars, and you get the same thing. Yeast start eating those sugars and they leave behind diacetyl in the body or in the bottle. So, yeah, byproduct of fermentation, and you usually just try to keep the yeast going long enough to clean it up and clean up their own mess.
Yeah, and in terms of flavour, Adrian, the thing that is most commonly associated with is like butterscotch, and basically it gives like a sort of silky coating on the tongue. If it's predominant, like so again with pilsners, some pilsners a small amount of diacetyl is acceptable. The problem, and my understanding from a brewing perspective, is that diacetyl is quite volatile, or the reaction that produces diacetyl is quite volatile. So not many brewers will allow diacetyl to settle in a can or a bottle, because if it continues to work through the ferment process after packaging, it can really take hold and go like turn up the dial, and you can go from 0 to 1,000 or something like that in terms of the flavour. So a lot of the Czech breweries and Pilsner brewers, they'll allow diacetyl in the keg stuff or across the tap, but they won't allow it in their packaged stuff because it can be quite volatile and heat and things can affect it after. But basically, if you get it detected in small amounts in some styles, it's acceptable. It'll come through as just like a little bit of a butterscotch flavour and a little bit of a slight coating on the tongue. If it's a fault in the beer, and it's rancid, you'll know it. It tastes like almost like a nail polish or a varnish, or it's really intense. But in small quantities, it's quite okay.
Right.
Is that
There you go.
acceptable,
Pretty good explanation.
Simon? Okay.
Yeah, I've heard a bit of that, so that makes sense. Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just one of these British ale yeasts. Again, they're a producer of diacetyl. And so that's why a lot of these guidelines, a lot of the British beers, when you read them in the guidelines, they allow for that. They allow for a little bit of diacetyl. Stouts, these English bitters, they all in the guidelines say, yep, a little bit of diacetyl is acceptable for the style. Shall we have a look at flavour?
Yep.
All right, gentlemen, have a swig and tell us what you can taste.
If I seem a little bit aloof, it's because I'm trying to get Ryan. He's on the other end of the line and he's trying to get in, but he's having technical difficulties.
Okay. All right, Adrian, tell us what you taste in yours.
I'm getting
Yeah.
I get a little bit of like sweetness forward, like right on the tongue at the start, and that's not a caramel sweetness. It's like a little bit more of a bitter. That doesn't make sense, bitter sweetness. But there's a like the first part that hits the tongue is a nice sort of coating feeling. There's a little bit of sweetness, and then it sort of falls off the side of the tongue, and then I get a little bit of bitterness. But there's a really nice solid mouthfeel to it as well, which is really, flavoursome. It's like like a nice warm pudding type thing, like a sticky date pudding or something like that, where you're getting that sort of caramelization and sweetness and syrupy stuff that's just sort of hanging around in the tongue and just hanging around really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting before that you mentioned in the style guidelines about floral, because on first sip, I'm almost getting a bouquet, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
There's definitely florals there straight up. And then that caramel malt kicks in. The body's pretty good. And it seems really well attenuated. The finish is dry, but
It does finish dry, yeah.
Yeah, it finishes dry, but the body's there. So mid palate's got a lot going. As far as body's concerned, but yeah, it finishes dry, which is that's good.
Yeah, that's the style. That's the idea. Let me read the guidelines for flavour and bitterness. Did it finish bitter?
I get bitterness on the side of the tongue as it falls off. Initial sweet caramel, then sort of goes down the side of the tongue, and then you get that little bitterness on the side.
Yeah, I'm getting the same as Nigel. That bitterness is towards the back end, and then it finishes dry. So it just runs out on the bitterness into that dry finish.
Yeah, cool. It sounds good. Like this seems
really good.
Yeah, this is it's really well done. I think that's the party trick you want to do with these beers. You want to have this big, sweet, complex malt presence, which this one has, and all those other, like the hops. You get these floral hops, a bit of earthy hops, and then the dry finish and the bitterness, and it just disappears. It's gone. I think it's really cool. I think that's what we're looking for in that style of beer. I'll read out what it says about flavour. Medium to medium high bitterness with supporting flavours evident. The malt profile is typically bready, biscuity, nutty, or lightly toasty, and optionally has a moderately low to moderate caramel or toffee flavour. So that's fair enough. Those are the things we're picking up, aren't they?
Yeah.
Hop flavour, moderate to moderately high, typically with a floral, earthy, resiny, or fruit character. Hop bitterness and flavour should be noticeable, but should not totally dominate the malt flavours. Moderately low to high fruity esters. Optionally may have low amounts of alcohol. Well, it's got alcohol, but it means alcohol flavour, alcohol presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, on tongue. Medium dry to dry finish, generally no diacetyl, although very low levels are allowed.
Yeah, so interesting. Two words that picked up in that, resinous. Okay, so resin you normally associate with hops and like a piney thing, but I'm actually thinking too that if you actually looked at the definition of the word resinous, that outside of beer, I mean, there's an oil quality to resin, right?
Mm.
So if you talk about viscosity in oils and things like that, you talk about that sort of filmy, like that sort of film that coats, So if you put vegetable oil on your tongue, right, straight away it's like a coating. And I reckon when they talk about resinous here, they're not talking about hop resin. They're talking about that little coating of oil, because I'm getting that certainly on the top of my tongue, not on the side, because the side is where the bitterness comes in. But I was trying to think of like, okay, what is this thing that I'm getting on the top of my tongue? And if two words popped out, the alcohol and the resin, and I reckon I just get like a fine, I'll call it a resinous coating, which is like a sort of slippery oil that sits on the tongue and little bit boozy. Like, you remember Benadryl expectorant cough medicine? Remember when Mum used to force you to drink that? And that sort of, it had that little bit of like that sort of smooth slipperiness that sort of went down, but it also left that coating on your tongue. And if I'm not saying this taste, like I don't get the taste of cough medicine, but I get that sort of little coating on the top of the tongue, which I think is a little bit of resin residue, if that's what it is.
Yep.
Yeah. These beers, like it's a fuller body beer. Like it is tending towards a full body. I think that's part of it too. It's got this thickness and sweetness to it, and that might be part of what you're describing as well. This, it's to do with the malts that go into it, but we'll see if Matt joins us. We can talk to him about that.
Yeah, we've tried quite a number of attacks at it, and he hasn't had much luck. So I might have to catch up with him after and sort of add a little bit in or something like that. But yeah. So is it in terms of the mouthfeel, the description in the guidelines? Does it say medium? Is that what it says?
Mouthfeel is, well, I'll read that now. Mouthfeel is medium light to medium full body. This is more tending to medium full, I think, for me.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. Low to moderate carbonation, although bottle versions will be higher. So it does allow for a can, to have a medium sort of carbonation, because obviously it's a lot lower on the cask versions. Stronger versions may have a slight alcohol warmth, but this character should not be too high. In other words, it shouldn't feel like a Boilermaker. Yeah, I'll just read this style comparison. More evident malt and hop flavours than special or best bitter, as well as more alcohol. Stronger versions may overlap somewhat with British strong ales, although strong bitters will tend to be paler and more bitter. More malt flavour, particularly caramel and esters, than an American pale ale, with different finishing hop character. And you see the difference between that and an American pale ale? Because this is like a British pale ale. kind of. But it's darker. There's a lot more going on with the malt. There's a lot more malt focus. whereas an American pale ale, it's all about the hops, isn't it? You've got this usually just a clean, grainy, sweet malt underbelly to support all these citrus hops.
That's interesting because it compares it to a British strong ale, and I'm like straight onto the thing. I'm like, British strong ale. Why aren't I all over that? Like that's a style that I can't say that I don't think I've had too many of.
Yeah.
But it's at 5.5 to 8%, so up the ante on that one.
Yeah, they actually say like with strong ale's kind of like this. It's almost like a no man's land in the guidelines. Like there's this beer, there's this strong bitter, and then there's an English barley wine, and strong ale's kind of a category that catches the other beers that don't quite fall. They're too strong for the strong bitter, but too weak for a English barley wine, and so English strong ale kind of captures those.
Right. There's quite a few in that sort of range as well. So under strong British ale, you've got British strong ale, old ale, wee heavy, and English barley wine. That's a whole another place where I haven't really gone, and I'm still like I've done the German and European stuff. I'm doing the American stuff, but interestingly, there's just seems like there's just a big gamut of styles in the English ones as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Shepherd's Name Bishop's Finger is one of the examples of this strong bitter. And I picked one of them up from Dan Murphy's to learn the style and to look at it. Oh, I smelt it was like someone had struck a match.
Oh, really?
And then I tasted it and it was like, yeah. And what I realised what it is, it's the water.
Right.
Because that's it's Burtonized. It's Burton-on-Trent. That's the water they used.
Yeah.
Which is really high in sulfate content.
Okay.
So that's what gives these beers their dry finish. That one in particular, those Burtonized ones finish a lot drier than this one. This one's a lot more restrained in the sulfate levels and the balance. I'm going on talking about chemistry, but when you got we're talking about balance between chloride and sulfate in beer. If you got heavy chloride, it gives you a longer finish to the beer, and that's often nice in stouts. New England IPAs, hazy IPAs, try to get a higher chloride balance so that it finishes longer and not as bitter. But when you have high sulfate levels, so these beers that have them are more American IPAs, it finishes drier and accentuates the bitterness in the beer. And so these ones have more of a high sulfate level. The chemistry will be similar to an American IPA where it's more, and that's what gives you that dry finish. And you can have this big malty beer, but then it finishes dry and bitter in the end.
I don't get a real dry finish. I still get a fair bit of residual flavour, which for me, I still get a coating. I still get that sweetness. My tongue, like if I walked out now and stopped drinking this beer, I could still taste it in 10 minutes time, I reckon.
Yeah.
That's not to say that it's not dry, but I'm trying to associate those two different things in like normally I'd finish dry with sharpness and cleanness, but maybe I'm I'm not sure if I'm really picking up on the dry finish, but I'm certainly getting a residual chloriness around the tongue. So, but that doesn't.
Okay. Yeah. This one is not as dry as others on the market, which I quite like. It's similar to the conversation we had earlier. I don't want if I want to get a beer and appreciate the malt quality in it and all that character, I don't want it to finish dry before I get to try that and enjoy that and let it linger on the palate.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, Shepherd's Neame is one that's really dry and really heavy on that sulfate, and you know it when you try it. This one's been a lot more subtle in that balance, and I think I prefer that because it's more of a play. It's more of a subtle play between the malt balance and the hops, and I quite like what they've done with that.
Yeah.
Adrian, what's the ABV on the one that you're drinking from Hard Road?
Yeah. 5.5.
Okay, well, that's sort of up on the mid to high end of that scale. So, and
Yeah.
most of the characters and qualities that we've been discussing with this one similar, or are you getting any sort of diversion from what we're talking about?
No, pretty much what you're saying is what I'm getting.
Yeah.
Um, it was interesting what you said, Nigel, about the viscosity and the mouthfeel and everything happening with your tongue. Yeah, I didn't think about that until you said it, and yeah, they're absolutely nailing that as well.
Yeah.
I'm getting the same coating on my tongue, and there's that caramelization. Um, yeah, there is certainly the dry finish, but it's not a long dry finish by any means, but it is there.
I reckon if I had any other beer if I wanted to have any other beer now, I'd have to have a palate cleanser. Like I'd have to have some water or something sharp and clean because my tongue is well and truly coated now. That's not a bad thing. I actually like it because it means I can enjoy the flavour for longer. But there's so much happening in my mouth at the moment that I couldn't.
Yeah.
If I picked up another beer, it'd have to be like a gozer or something like that to give me a like a mouth flush to clean it out before I reset and went again. Because if I tried something else now, I don't think I'd taste it. But the other thing too is we talked about the temperature, and like I had mine out of the fridge a little bit before we went on, so probably about 5 minutes or so. It's actually obviously it's warmed up a little bit now, getting to the end of the glass, but I don't think it. Sometimes you get to a point where the beer gets too warm, tails off, lose flavour. Like this just has had that nice sort of building. It's like layers or lacing on a glass. It's like every time you taste it, you get another round of the same thing. So I feel like it's just putting another layer on the tongue, another layer on the tongue, another layer on the tongue, and it just keeps building nicely as I've gone on. So yeah, I think that's the bit about that. And you think about it too from a just from a lifestyle point of view, like you're sitting in a cold, miserable pub in the middle of England, in a rainy day, and you don't want to go outside, and you're eating your chip booty and your your mushy peas and all that sort of stuff. Like drinking one of these that just sort of keeps you feel like you're topped up, and it's only it's under 5%, but it's nice and warm and refreshing, and it's not refreshing, but sort of, and you just feel like every time you have it, it's like that that putting on a blanket or getting into bed, or that coziness about it, like because the thing about sweetness, and I was reading this once about like the chemistry in the brain. When you get sweet flavors, it gives you like it releases these sort of, I don't know whether it's endorphins or whatever in your body to make you feel happy. So sweetness is related to happiness, and bitterness is actually related to fear, and because things often that are bitter are not good for you. So but sweetness releases like these endorphins in your brain that says, I'm going to my happy place. So you can imagine sitting around all day in a shitty English pub and drinking this and going, yep, I'm in my happy place. And I think that's the thing about these caramel malts that I really dig, because they just leave you feeling good. Hops drives you. It's like an invigorating thing because it's sharp and bitter and got all this flavor going on, so it's a sensation thing. But with caramel and malts and stuff like that and the sweetness, it's a really good feeling. Like it's that I'm in a good place, I'm happy, and I think that's what I dig about caramels and malts and stuff like that, is that it makes you feel good. That's why chocolate makes you feel good too.
It just needs pork scratchings. And why can't we get them, widely available in Australia?
I just think about all I can think about now is a pie floater, from Harry Cafes to Wheels, like big pie, ton of gravy around it, mushy peas and mashed potato on top, and just that would be absolute killer now. The only problem is it's about 24 or 5 degrees outside at the moment. Not
Yeah.
Oh,
Now that do you want to talk about what's in these beers?
Nothing much in mine.
I'll run through the guidelines. It just says pale, amber, or crystal malts, which are going to give you more character, and crystal malts usually a bit of sweetness. May use a touch of black malt for colour adjustment. Not much, not as much as a stout, obviously, just a tiny amount. May use sugar adjuncts, corn or wheat.
I did see that.
So it's another one.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's just like, I think this is common everywhere, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's somewhere it's not in the world, but it seems to be just the Germans who have hang-ups about that, about putting things like sugar in beer. Everyone else around the world's going, what's sweet? What can we turn into alcohol? We'll throw that in as well. I think that's part of getting that extra alcohol in these stronger bitters as opposed to the lower alcohol ones. That's part of how they get it, because they still want it to finish dry in the end, and the more malt you add, the more malt presence you add. By adding sugar, it's something they bump up alcohol without adding too much sweetness and cloyingness to it. English finishing hops are most traditional, but any hops are fair game. I don't know. I wouldn't, but I mean, you couldn't put, I mean, imagine that if they put Galaxy in that, or Citra, or.
Yeah.
I think what they're probably saying is you'd probably have to use them traditionally, but you wouldn't want those flavors hanging around in the beer. It's just because it's not that sort of beer, is it? You don't get these English hops don't have that citrus and grapefruit and guava and all these crazy things we get in New World hops. It's just not part of the style.
I reckon you could probably get away with some European hops though, like some some other sort of more traditional, like styles. You'd probably get away with because they're still pretty grassy and earthy.
Yeah, you get away with, but you wouldn't get what you get from the English hops in this one. You get this kind of marmalade, and there's the floral bouquet to it, and maybe a little bit of earthiness as well. And that's kind of unique to those English hops. You don't, those what we call noble hops, those German hops and Saaz hops, things like that, they're more floral and spicy. You don't get that sort of those fruit flavors out of them. And again, it's different to the American hops you get. This, more marmalade is what you sort of get out of it. The the English ones anyway. Characterful British yeast, we talked about that, and we talked about Burton versions use medium to high sulfate water, which can increase the perception of dryness and add an oily or sulfury aroma and flavour. So we've already talked about that in the chemistry of it. Cool.
It's amazing. Like I'm sniffing an empty glass, and I can still smell. But I can still smell everything that was in the beer before. Whereas normally, if you had I don't know, like I don't know, but normally you smell an empty glass. There's not a lot of aroma going on in it, but there's a lot of aroma in that, and it's all the same thing. Like again, if you just passed that to me blind, and I smelt that, I'd go, oh yeah, that's a big toffee malty something, and then you'd show it to me. It's like, no, it's an empty glass. There's a lot going on in that. I've had like you pour a beer into a glass and smell less than what's in that empty glass now. So there's a lot of aroma.
Yeah.
All right. So have we covered everything off on that? And the guidelines?
Yeah, that's everything from the guidelines I wanted to talk about.
Yep. I guess the thing about with the style though over here is there's not a lot of options, in Australia. But this one from Little Bang, it's always been a popular one. I think anybody that does an ESB generally, like the people who like that style, they'll sort it out. Probably apart from the English versions, which, I mean, it's weird how things have changed. And so I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were saying, like, 10, even, probably 7 years ago. I mean, like, all that stuff up there, like, realistically, it's probably all more than, 5 years old. But when you think about it, like, 7 years ago, I was probably, I reckon, probably 60% of the beers I drank were imported 7 years ago, and you fast forward to today, and I haven't drunk an imported beer for God knows how long, because there's so much good quality beer coming out locally. But, if I went back and had a look through all the beers, I'm sure I'd find like half a dozen. I know I've had Fuller's before, and there'd be like half a dozen European or imported beers that I've had of this style before, but there'd probably only be maybe two or three ESBs or this style of beer that I've had from that Australian. Hard Road are doing one, which is great. They're pumping out some good beers. And I think that's the thing that I guess, even though we've come a long way in Australia, there's still not a lot of diversity in styles. When you look at all the breweries that are popping up all over the place, they're still, 60, 70% of them are punching out pale ale, IPA, hazy, lager, and a porter. Like, that's their core range, where it's only, you look at, say, someone like Slow Lane Brewing, or, Little Bang actually do that's I mean, there's not many breweries in Australia that would have an ESB, a black IPA, and American barley wine in their lineup, right? So that's sort of a little bit unique in itself. But some of these styles just really not commonly available in the country, and it's a shame because apart from the fact that there's a lot of really good styles out there, we're just not seeing that diversity. And I think part of the thing is what we're going to see in the next, I don't know, 5 years maybe, is, hang on a sec, like, if you open a brewery there and you open one there and you open one there and you're all punching out the same thing, like, what's the enticement? I mean, I work in marketing. First rule of marketing is point of difference. So and they would say, oh yeah, but we've got the community vibe, and we're dog friendly, and we've got music on a Sunday afternoon. It's like, mate, so is every other, and the backstory is the two blokes that worked in IT. There's just, it seems like there's just been this, and I'm okay with going to a brewery like that if they punch out, tap room, if they punch out a really solid pale ale and a really solid IPA, really solid Pilsner or whatever, I'm quite happy to go there. I'm not complaining about that, because I'm happy to go into all these different breweries. But I just think we need to see some more diversity in the styles, and like expand the range and find points of differences, because you've got some awesome brewers out there, but they're all sort of seem to be rushing around the same thing, and it'd be just nice to see it, diversify a little bit over the next few years.
An education, like, of the average craft beer drinker, like, for a lot of craft, although it is happening, like, a lot of craft beer drinkers used to just go, yeah, I like American Pale Ale and IPA, because that was craft beer, like, maybe 5 years ago, maybe a bit longer. And then all of a sudden, different colours of IPA came along, and people, oh yeah. And then we had sours became a thing, and there was milkshake IPAs and fruited things, and Gozas became a thing. So I think we are expanding, and I think the more people realise, oh, there's more out there that I want to try. Maybe, I guess my point is, maybe it's a bit market driven. Like, these breweries look at all the consumers that they're trying to sell their product to, and they're all saying, well, I want a hazy. That's what I want. I want to buy hazy. I want my better produce a hazy so that I can pay my rent.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think in time, people get the hang of it. People will learn more. And with people, there's going to be people who drink a beer like that, but once they drink it, they'll be like, oh, I like that. But they got to actually pick it up, rather than it sitting on a shelf and people going, oh, what's that? Oh, no, I'll get a hazy.
Yeah, which is which is basically what we're here to try and do, and that's why I like picking different styles. And I mean, I always bang on about Pilsners and bang on about red IPAs, but I think you'll see now that, like, that even 2 years ago, I was the only one talking about it, and now like you see how many people use the best Red's a best hashtag, or like lager love and stuff like that now, because everybody's going. And I'm not suggesting that I drove it, but just going, like, people are coming around to those styles now because there's a lot of people talking about them. And especially in our group, we're trying to get people to think about some diversity there as well. But I mean, even for me, I look at this and go, wow, I've just got so much more to learn about English styles of beer, because there's not a lot of them here, and we just need to keep exploring. So all part of the journey of the journey of beer.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Anybody got anything else they want to add, or?
Yeah, look, I live in the Yarra Valley, or close to the Yarra Valley in Melbourne. Another good brewery that does ESB is Hargraves Hill.
Yeah.
If you've ever had that, and a few years ago they actually changed the recipe.
Yeah.
And it was good originally, but now it's even better.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
If you can get onto Hargraves Hill, that's a good one too.
We might have to do another beer swap, Adrian.
I know. I need to send you up a few, don't I?
Yeah. But the Hargraves Hill are amazing. Like, they make one of my favorite beers, that Phoenix. Like,
that's dropped, hasn't it?
Yeah. They've just dropped another one, have they?
Just about to now.
Okay. Well, I better get onto that, because that is like one of my all-time favorite beers. I bought a cellar worth of those recently, and they make some amazing beers. So.
That is an amazing beer.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining. Sorry, Ryan couldn't join us. He did try. He had some technical difficulties, and I did try and connect him up, but everything we tried didn't work. So I'll see. Maybe we'll either get him to add something later, or I might get him to join in on another one. Maybe we can do the black IPA next week or something like that, and have another crack at it. So anyway, thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate it. And all the best.